There is a particular kind of silence that lives in certain people, not the comfortable silence of contentment, but the heavy silence of someone holding their breath. You've likely felt it, that moment when you're in a room full of voices, laughter, connection, and yet you feel entirely achingly alone. Not because you're physically isolated, but because inside your chest you're carrying something no one else can see, a weight, a secret. A burden so familiar that you've stopped noticing how much it costs you to carry it. Watch these people for a moment. They move through their lives with a particular grace, don't they? Composed, reliable, always having answers, always managing, always coping, always holding it together. From the outside, they appear strong, invulnerable, even. They're the ones you call when you need help, yet they rarely call anyone when they're drowning. They're the architects of their own islands, building the walls high enough that no one can see the lighthouse beam of their desperation flickering inside. But there's a paradox hiding in their strength. The very thing that makes them admirable, their ability to shoulder everything alone, is also the very thing that's slowly, quietly suffocating them. They carry not just their own stories, their own pain, their own confusion, but somehow they've become convinced that this is what it means to be human, to be strong, to be worthy, to not burden anyone else with the truth of what's actually happening inside. This is the beginning of something that runs deeper than mere independence. This is the psychology of people who carry everything alone. And if you've ever felt this way, if you've ever been this way, then what follows is written for you. Not to judge, but to illuminate. To say, I see you. And there is another way. The roots of this pattern, the habit of carrying everything alone, rarely begin in adulthood. They begin somewhere small. They begin in childhood, in the gap between what was and what you needed. Perhaps you grew up in a home where emotions were luxuries no one could afford. Perhaps vulnerability was met not with comfort, but with criticism. Perhaps you learned early that your sadness was an inconvenience. Your fear was weakness. Your pain was something to hide rather than share. Or perhaps the opposite occurred. You were the strong one, the one who had to hold the family together while it was falling apart, the little adult in a house of chaos. These early experiences shape something profound in how you relate to the world. They create what psychologists call attachment patterns, the invisible templates we use to navigate every relationship that follows. When you learn as a child that you cannot trust others with your vulnerability, you don't simply learn a behavioral strategy. You learn an identity. You become the keeper of your own secrets, the guardian of your own pain. And over time, this becomes so integrated into who you are that you stop seeing it as a choice. It becomes your nature. But there's another layer here, another psychological principle at work, the concept of responsibility locus, or more accurately, what psychologists call an internal locus of control taken to its painful extreme. Most people exist somewhere along a spectrum. On one end, they blame external circumstances for everything that happens to them. On the other end, they take complete responsibility for every outcome, every feeling, every problem in their life and the lives around them. People who carry everything alone often live on that extreme end. They believe, truly believe, that if something goes wrong, it's because they didn't handle it well enough. If someone else is struggling, it's their job to fix it. If there's pain, it's their duty to contain it. This is exhausting, but more than that, it's deeply lonely. Consider a woman named Sarah. She grew up watching her mother struggle with depression while her father worked endless hours. There was no one to care for either of them, so Sarah appointed herself to the role. At 8 years old, she became the emotional caregiver, the problem solver, the one who made sure everyone's needs were met before her own. By the time she was a teenager, this wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. She was useful, she was needed. She was seen only when she was solving problems or taking on burdens. 40 years later, Sarah is successful, accomplished, and utterly unable to let anyone help her. She manages her company like a solo pilot manages a plane, checking every instrument herself, trusting no one else with the controls. When her marriage struggled, she didn't tell her husband what she was feeling. She tried to fix it alone. When her health declined, she didn't seek support. She researched solutions at midnight and pushed through the pain during the day. She has friends who love her, but she knows almost nothing about most of them because she spent decades asking questions and deflecting about herself. Then there's Michael. His childhood was different, but the destination was the same. His father believed that vulnerability was a character flaw, that real men solved their own problems and never burdened others. His mother, loving but exhausted, couldn't give him what she didn't have to give. So Michael learned to be small, to not ask, to notice what others needed and provide it, but never to need anything in return. Now, at 45, he carries a secret depression he's never told anyone about. He's competent at work, a good friend, a reliable partner, but no one actually knows him. Because the one thing he could never learn to do was to let someone inside. What's happening in these stories beneath the surface is something called emotional suppression as a survival mechanism. In the moments when you learned that your feelings weren't safe, you didn't just learn to hide them occasionally. You learned to cut them off at the source. You learned to feel them less intensely, to rationalize them away, to convince yourself that what you were experiencing didn't actually matter that much. Over years and decades, this becomes automatic. You don't have to consciously suppress anymore. Your nervous system does it for you. You can experience genuine trauma and your face remains calm. You can be in excruciating emotional pain and sound fine on the phone. You've become so skilled at this that sometimes you don't even know what you're feeling until weeks later when it emerges as exhaustion or irritability or a hollow, inexplicable sadness. The wound, ultimately, is this. You learned that you were only valuable when you were useful. You learned that your needs were a burden. You learned that connection meant giving, not receiving. And so you built an entire identity around carrying everything alone, never realizing that in doing so, you were building a prison. You do this in your relationships. You listen deeply to your partner's struggles. You hold space for their fears. You remember every important detail they share with you. But when they ask what's wrong, you say nothing. When they sense you're struggling and offer support, you say you're fine. You do this because somewhere inside, you believe that if you let them see you struggling, they'll leave. Or worse, they'll see that you're not as strong as they thought you were, and their respect will evaporate. So you maintain the performance. You are stable, you are reliable, you are the rock. And slowly, over months and years, your partner becomes confused. They feel you withdrawing. They sense the distance. They offer intimacy and you offer distance. They want reciprocity and you want to remain the giver. The relationship becomes a slow, painful isolation. Two people in the same bed who aren't actually connecting. You wonder why you feel so lonely despite not being alone. You do this in your work. You say yes to every project, every request, every extra responsibility. You work late into the evening. You check emails before you fall asleep and immediately after you wake. You don't ask for help and you don't admit when you're overwhelmed. You become indispensable, which means you become trapped. Because if you're indispensable, you can never rest. You can never step back. You can never be vulnerable about your limitations. And so you push harder, faster, longer, until one day you notice that you can't remember the last time you felt genuinely engaged or excited about your work. It's all obligation now. It's all burden. You wonder why you feel so resentful despite being recognized for your reliability. You do this in your relationship with yourself. Your internal dialogue becomes a courtroom where you are both judge and defendant. You make mistakes and you punish yourself for them. You miss a deadline, forget to call a friend, disappoint someone, and the voice inside your head becomes merciless. You should have known better. You should have handled it differently. You should have been better. There's no compassion in that voice, only judgment. There's no room for being human, for being imperfect, for the simple truth that everyone fails sometimes. Instead, you carry the weight of your own self-criticism. You compare yourself constantly to others, and you always find yourself lacking. You wonder why you feel so exhausted despite everything in your life being, technically, fine. You do this in solitude. The moments when you're finally alone, after everyone has gone to bed, after work is done, when there's no one left to take care of. something shifts. You finally feel the weight you've been carrying all day. You finally feel the emotions you've been suppressing. Sometimes it comes as a flood, tears you can't stop, anxiety that grips your chest, despair that's overwhelming. Sometimes it comes as numbness, a void where feelings should be, an empty exhaustion, a sense that you've somehow become hollow. You sit in this silence and you realize how far away from yourself you've become. You've spent so much time being what everyone else needed that you've forgotten who you actually are, what you actually want, what you actually feel. And in that realization, there's a kind of grief because you understand that somewhere along the way you disappeared. You wonder why you feel so small despite appearing so strong. You wonder why connection feels so impossible despite being surrounded by people who care about you. You wonder why you feel so empty despite carrying so much. These questions aren't flaws in your logic. They're not signs of weakness, they're signals. They're your psyche trying to tell you that something is fundamentally wrong with the equation you've been living by. The weight you carry gets heavier every year. It's the weight of unshared truths, unspoken fears, unasked requests, unfelt emotions, uncompleted grieving processes. It's the weight of a life lived in performance, where you are always on stage, always managing the impression you make, always ensuring that no one sees the cracks in your carefully constructed facade. You do this. You do this every single day. And you do this because you believe it's the price of being acceptable, the cost of being worthy, the only way to ensure that no one will ever see you as a burden. But what if this equation itself is wrong? What if carrying everything alone isn't a strength at all, but a profound misunderstanding about what it actually means to be human? The first thing to understand on the path toward healing is this: the patterns you developed weren't wrong. They weren't mistakes. They were intelligent adaptations. In the environment where you grew up, in the circumstances that shaped you, they protected you. They kept you safe. They made survival possible. Your nervous system learned these patterns because they worked. So when you begin to challenge them, there's often a voice inside that resists. That voice isn't your enemy, it's your protector. It's the part of you that learned these patterns and is terrified of what will happen if you let them go. Healing doesn't mean abandoning these patterns overnight. It means slowly, gently, beginning to question whether they still serve you. It means creating space, even tiny, vulnerable space, where you can be a little bit more honest, a little bit more present, a little bit more yourself, with one person, in one moment. It might be as small as telling your partner, actually, I'm not okay right now and I need help. It might be as simple as admitting to yourself, alone in your car, that you're struggling. It might be reaching out to someone, anyone, and saying, I can't carry this alone anymore. These moments don't require you to change everything at once. They simply require you to begin. The second reframe is to understand that vulnerability is not weakness. This is something you've likely heard before, but it lives differently in your body when you truly begin to comprehend it. Vulnerability is honesty, it's authenticity. It's the brave act of letting someone see you as you actually are, not as you believe you should be. And here's the paradox: when you finally allow yourself to be vulnerable, when you finally let someone see the weight you're carrying, something unexpected happens. The people who actually love you, not the version of you that's always strong, not the version that never needs anything, but you, the actual flawed, struggling human you. They often love you more deeply. They feel closer to you. They trust you more because they finally have evidence that you trust them. The third reframe is about the nature of burden itself. You've spent so long believing that your needs, your feelings, your struggles are burdens to others. But consider this: allowing someone to help you, allowing someone to support you, allows them to feel needed. It allows them to feel like they matter. It creates connection. It creates intimacy. When you refuse to let anyone help you, you're not protecting them from burden. You're denying them the opportunity to show love. You're preventing the very reciprocity that creates real relationships. The people in your life don't want you to carry everything alone. They want to matter to you. Let them. To begin this healing, consider these practices. First, begin noticing. Without judgment, without trying to change anything, simply notice the moments when you're about to push away help, when you're about to say, I'm fine, When you're about to take on another burden that isn't yours to carry, just notice. Awareness is the first step toward change. Second, practice small, safe disclosures. Find one person, a therapist, a trusted friend, a mentor, and practice being a little bit more honest with them. Share something you've been keeping secret. Notice that the world doesn't end. Notice that they don't leave. Notice that you don't disappear. These small practices rewire your nervous system. They begin to teach your body that it's safe to be seen. Third, develop a practice of self compassion. When you notice the voice inside your head criticizing you, offer yourself the same kindness you would offer a friend. Speak to yourself the way you speak to the people you love. Healing looks like this: you still might be responsible, you might still be capable, you might still be strong, but you're not alone. And you're not alone, not because you're weak, but because you're finally willing to be human. You're finally allowing the people around you to be your people, not just the people you take care of. You're finally building relationships where the traffic flows in both directions instead of only outward, only giving, only you disappearing into everyone else's needs. The metaphor for this healing is something like the process of learning to float. For years, you've been swimming against every current, fighting to stay above water by sheer force of will. You're exhausted. Your arms ache, and then someone tells you, stop fighting, lay back, let the water hold you. This feels impossible at first. It feels like you'll drown. But when you finally relax, when you finally stop fighting, you discover something surprising. The water, community, connection, reciprocity, vulnerability, it actually holds you. You don't sink, you float. And floating requires so much less energy than swimming against the current. Here is the truth that lives at the end of this journey. You were never meant to carry everything alone. The belief that you were, that belief came from pain, from a time when you didn't have anyone to rely on, from an environment where showing need felt dangerous. But that time has passed. You survived. You're here. And now the most courageous thing you can do isn't to carry more. It's to finally, carefully, vulnerably ask for help. It's to let someone see you. It's to risk being a burden, because in that risk, you might finally discover what it actually means to be loved. Not for what you do, not for how strong you are, not for what you provide, but for exactly who you are. In your fullness and your fragility, your strength and your struggle, your light and your shadow. That's where healing lives. That's where home actually is. In the moment when you finally stop carrying everything alone and you realize you never had to. There was always room in other people's hearts for you, for your truth, for your struggle. You just had to be brave enough to lay down the burden and trust that you wouldn't fall. You're here now. And it's time.